It is 27 minutes past midnight on February 28, 1943. 6 men are inside Adolf Hitler's most important fortress, not to steal documents, not to rescue prisoners, but to destroy 1,200 pounds of heavy water. If they fail, the Nazis will build the atomic bomb first. If they succeed and are caught, they will be tortured and executed. They have 18 minutes before the guards complete their patrol cycle. The fuses are lit. There is no turning back. If you appreciate stories like this, please hit the like button and subscribe. These stories matter. In 1942, the race for the atomic bomb depends on one substance, heavy water. It is identical to normal water, except its hydrogen atoms are twice as heavy. This slows down neutrons in a nuclear chain reaction, making an atomic bomb possible. There is only one place in the world that produces enough heavy water to matter: the Vemork hydroelectric plant in Richukan, Norway. Built into the side of a cliff 600 feet above a frozen gorge, it is surrounded by minefields, guarded by 200 German soldiers, patrolled day and night. The Nazis consider it impregnable. Winston Churchill does not agree. On October 19, 1942, he orders the British Special Operations Executive to destroy Vemork. The first attempt is Operation Freshman. 2 gliders carrying 34 Royal Engineers. Both gliders crash in a storm. 15 men die on impact. The survivors are captured, tortured, and executed. The second attempt is codenamed Gunnerside. This time, the team will be Norwegian Commandos, men who know the mountains, who speak the language, who have trained in Scotland for 1 year. Their leader is 23-year-old Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg. There are 6 men. Their mission is to parachute into Norway, infiltrate Vemork, plant explosives, and escape 280 miles to Sweden, on foot, in winter, with the entire German garrison hunting them. Ronneberg is told that if the mission fails, the Allies will firebomb Vemork with heavy bombers, killing every Norwegian worker inside. On the night of February 16, 1943, 6 Norwegian Commandos board a Halifax bomber at RAF Tempsford, England. Each man carries a rucksack with explosives, detonators, a pistol, cyanide capsules, and enough food for 2 weeks. The plan is simple: parachute onto a frozen lake 30 miles from Vemork, link up with a 4-man reconnaissance team already in Norway, ski to the plant, break in, destroy the heavy water cells, and escape to Sweden. At 11:42 p.m., the Halifax crosses the Norwegian coast. Anti-aircraft fire opens up. The pilot drops to 400 feet. At 11:52 p.m., the jump light turns green. Ronneberg leaps. 5 men follow. The parachutes open. They land in deep snow. The temperature is minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind is 40 miles per hour. 1 man's parachute is torn. Another sprains his ankle on landing. They gather their equipment and begin skiing toward the rendezvous cabin. It is 30 miles away. They have 3 days to get there. They arrive on February 19th. The reconnaissance team, codenamed Swallow, is waiting. The men have been hiding in a mountain cabin for 4 months, surviving on moss and a single reindeer. They look like skeletons, but they have mapped every guard patrol, every searchlight, every entrance to Vemork. They know the only way in. The Swallow team landed in Norway on October 18, 1942, 4 months before Gunnerside. Their mission was to prepare the ground, map the target, and wait. They were dropped with 2 weeks of rations. The weather turned. Blizzards buried the supply drops. The Germans increased patrols. The men retreated higher into the Hardangervidda Plateau, the largest mountain plateau in Europe, 3,500 feet above sea level, where winter temperatures drop to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit and the wind can reach 100 miles per hour. They found an abandoned hunting cabin. The roof leaked. There was no stove. They slept in shifts to prevent freezing. Their food ran out in November. They survived on moss scraped from rocks, boiled into a paste. In December, they shot a single reindeer. They rationed the meat to last 6 weeks. By January, they were eating the hide, the hooves, the antlers. 1 man lost 40 pounds. Another developed frostbite on both feet. But they continued their reconnaissance. Every week, 2 men skied 20 miles to the edge of Rjukan, observed Vemork through binoculars, counted the guards, timed the patrols, sketched the perimeter. They noted that the Germans had added searchlights, minefields, and guard dogs. They noted that the gorge was unguarded. They noted the drainage tunnel. When Gunnerside arrived on February 19th, the Swallow team had been waiting for 124 days. They were emaciated, frostbitten, and exhausted. But they had the intelligence. They knew the way in. The combined team of 9 men spent the next 8 days in the cabin preparing for the raid. Ronneberg reviewed the plans with the Swallow guides. The target was the heavy water concentration room in the basement of the main building. 18 high-concentration cells. Each cell held 50 liters of heavy water. The cells were made of stainless steel, surrounded by pipes and valves. The room was guarded by a single Norwegian night watchman. The Germans considered the location so secure that they did not post soldiers inside. The plan was to approach from below, climb the gorge, enter through the drainage tunnel, cut through the fence, break into the basement, place explosives, and escape before the alarm was raised. Ronneberg assigned roles. He and Sergeant Frederick Kaiser would enter the building and place the explosives. Kaiser was the demolitions expert. He had trained for 6 months in Scotland, practicing on a full-scale mock-up of the heavy water room. He could place the charges in darkness in under 10 minutes. 2 men would provide cover outside the building. The other 5 would guard the escape route. Each man carried a cyanide capsule. If captured, they were ordered to take it. The alternative was Gestapo interrogation. The men reviewed the schedule. The guard patrols followed a strict 18-minute cycle. The sentries walked the perimeter, checked the gates, and returned to the barracks. Between patrols, there was a window of 12 minutes when the compound was unwatched except for the tower guards, whose attention was focused outward toward the road and the bridge, not inward toward the building. The drainage tunnel was the key. It had been built in the 1930s to channel meltwater away from the plant. The Germans knew it existed, but they believed it was too narrow, too steep, and too exposed to be used for infiltration. They were wrong. On the night of February 27th, the weather cleared. The temperature was minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. The moon was 3/4 full, providing just enough light to navigate. At 8 p.m., the 9 men left the cabin. They skied in single file. No one spoke. They reached the edge of the gorge at 10 p.m. The descent began at 10:15 p.m. The edge of the gorge was a vertical drop, 600 feet to the frozen river below. The slope was covered in deep snow and ice. There was no path. The men used ropes to lower themselves one at a time. The snow was unstable. Every step triggered small avalanches. One man lost his footing and slid 200 feet before catching himself on a birch tree. Another man's rope snapped. He fell 30 feet into a snowdrift. The others pulled him out. It took 2 hours to reach the bottom. At the base of the gorge, the Mon River was frozen solid. The ice was 6 inches thick in some places, paper thin in others. The men could hear the water rushing underneath. They crossed in single file 20 feet apart to distribute the weight. One man broke through. The water was just above freezing. The others pulled him out. His clothes froze solid within 5 minutes. They could not stop. They could not light a fire. They kept moving. On the far side of the river, they found the base of the cliff. The drainage tunnel was 100 feet above them, built into the rock face. The climb was nearly vertical. The rock was covered in ice. The men used climbing spikes and ropes. It took 45 minutes to reach the tunnel entrance. The entrance was a metal grate, 3 feet wide, covered in snow. They cleared the snow with their hands. Kaiser cut through the grate with bolt cutters. One by one, the men crawled inside. The tunnel was 150 feet long, angled upward at 30 degrees. The walls were concrete, coated in a layer of ice 1/2 inch thick. The men crawled on their hands and knees, dragging their rucksacks behind them. The tunnel was pitch black. They used no lights. The sound of dripping water echoed. The air was damp and cold. At the far end, they reached a second grate. Beyond it, they could see the Vemork compound, floodlights, guard towers, the main building. It was 11:30 p.m. Kaiser cut through the grate. The men emerged one by one, crouching in the shadows. They were inside the perimeter. The heavy water building was 30 feet away. It was a 4-story concrete structure built into the side of the cliff. The entrance was a steel door, locked and guarded. The windows were narrow, barred with iron. Ronneberg and Kaiser circled the building, staying in the shadows. On the basement level, they found a single window, 3 feet wide, 18 inches tall, covered with a metal grate. Kaiser removed the grate with a crowbar. The window was not locked. It opened inward. Kaiser looked inside. He could see the heavy water concentration room, rows of stainless steel cells, pipes, valves, dim electric lights. A Norwegian man in work clothes sat at a desk, reading a newspaper, the night watchman. Kaiser squeezed through the window. He was a large man, over 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. The window was barely wide enough. He dropped to the floor. Ronneberg followed. 2 other men remained outside, watching the guard patrols. The window was left open for escape. Inside the heavy water room, the air was warm and humid. The walls were lined with 18 high-concentration cells, each one taller than a man, connected by a maze of pipes. The cells hummed with a low vibration. The watchman looked up. He saw 2 men in white snowsuits, faces blackened with soot, holding pistols. He raised his hands. Ronneberg spoke in Norwegian. "We are British soldiers. Do not move. Do not make noise. You will not be harmed." The man nodded. His face was pale. He said nothing. Kaiser moved to the cells. He opened his rucksack and removed 9 packages of plastic explosive, each one weighing 2 pounds, wrapped in brown paper. He placed the charges at the base of the cells where the pipes connected to the floor. He worked methodically, checking each placement twice. The cells were filled with 99.5% pure heavy water, the highest concentration in the world. Destroying them would set the Nazi atomic program back by at least 1 year, possibly 2. Each cell was a cylinder, 5 feet tall, 2 feet in diameter, made of welded stainless steel. The welds were the weak point. Kaiser placed the charges directly against the welds. When the explosives detonated, the welds would fail, the cells would rupture, and the heavy water would drain out. Kaiser connected the charges with detonation cord, a thin rope filled with explosive powder that burns at 20,000 feet per second. He attached a 30-second fuse to the cord. The fuse was British, designed to burn even in water. Kaiser had tested it dozens of times in Scotland. It had never failed. At 12:01 a.m., the charges were ready. Ronneberg checked his watch. The next guard patrol would pass at 12:15 a.m. They had 14 minutes. Kaiser lit the fuse. The cord hissed and sparked. Ronneberg grabbed the watchman by the arm and pushed him toward the window. "You must leave now. Run to the gate. Do not look back." The man climbed through the window and ran. Ronneberg and Kaiser followed. They dropped to the ground outside. The 4 men sprinted toward the gorge. Behind them, the fuse burned. The detonation cord glowed orange in the darkness of the heavy water room. The cells stood silent, filled with the substance that could change the war. 30 seconds. 20 seconds. The Commandos reached the edge of the compound. 10 seconds. They were at the gorge. 5 seconds. They began descending. 0. At 12:03 a.m., the charges detonated. The explosion was muffled, designed to rupture the cells without destroying the building. Inside the heavy water room, all 18 cells split open. Welds failed. Pipes burst. 1,200 pounds of heavy water, the entire German stockpile representing 2 years of production, poured onto the floor. The liquid was clear, indistinguishable from ordinary water except for its weight. It flowed into the drains, into the pipes, down through the foundation of the building and into the Mon River 600 feet below. Within 3 minutes, it was gone. The explosion shattered the windows. Glass rained onto the compound. The lights in the building went out. For 5 seconds, there was silence. Then the sirens began. The German guards ran toward the building, shouting. Searchlights swept the compound. Guard dogs were released. Officers emerged from the barracks, pulling on coats, shouting orders. The night shift workers ran outside. The main gate was locked. Sentries manned the machine gun posts. The entire garrison was on alert. But the Commandos were already 200 feet away, descending the cliff. They moved fast, sliding down the ropes, half running, half falling. They could hear the sirens, the dogs, the shouts. Bullets cracked overhead. The Germans were firing blind into the darkness. At the bottom of the gorge, the 9 men regrouped. They crossed the frozen river. They began climbing the opposite side. The climb was exhausting. Their legs burned. Their lungs ached in the cold air. Behind them, the German garrison mobilized. Over 3,000 soldiers were stationed in Ryukyu. Within 20 minutes, roadblocks were set up on every road. Patrols were sent into the mountains. The Gestapo began interrogating civilians. Every Norwegian man in Ryukyu between the ages of 18 and 50 was detained for questioning. 11 were arrested and sent to concentration camps. None of them knew anything. Hitler was informed of the raid at 6 a.m. He was told that saboteurs had destroyed the heavy water plant. He demanded the attackers be found and executed. He ordered the SS to conduct house-to-house searches. He authorized the execution of suspected collaborators. But the Norwegians had a 12-hour head start. At the top of the gorge, the 9 men paused. They looked back at Vemork. Smoke was rising from the building. Sirens echoed across the valley. Searchlights swept the compound. Ronneberg said, "It is done." The men split into 2 groups. Ronneberg led 5 men east, toward Sweden, 280 miles away. The plan was to ski across the Hardangervidda Plateau, through the mountains, avoiding all roads, all villages, all people. The other 3 men, Knut Haukelid, Arne Kjelstrup, and Klaus Helberg, remained in Norway to continue resistance operations. The 2 groups shook hands. No one knew if they would meet again. Ronneberg's group skied east into the Hardangervidda Plateau. The terrain was flat, featureless, covered in snow. There were no landmarks, no trees, no shelter. The temperature dropped to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind was constant, 40 to 50 miles per hour, driving snow into their faces. Visibility was less than 100 feet. They navigated by compass and stars. They skied 12 hours a day, from dawn until dark. At night, they dug snow caves, huddled together for warmth. They slept in shifts. If they slept too long, they would freeze. Their food ran out after 5 days. They shot a reindeer with a pistol. They butchered it with knives and ate the meat raw. They could not risk a fire. Smoke would be visible for miles. They avoided all villages, all roads, all people. One night, they passed within 200 yards of a German patrol. They lay flat in the snow, silent, as the soldiers walked past. Another night, they sheltered in an abandoned shepherd's hut. The roof was partially collapsed. Snow covered the floor. They huddled in the corner, sharing body heat. One man developed severe frostbite on his toes. Another suffered from snow blindness. They kept moving. The German search continued for 3 weeks. Over 10,000 soldiers combed the mountains. Aircraft flew reconnaissance missions, searching for tracks in the snow. The Gestapo interrogated over 400 civilians. Checkpoints were established on every road leading out of Ryukyu. Patrols searched every cabin, every farm, every barn within 50 miles of Vemork. Reward posters were put up in every town. 100,000 kroner for information leading to the capture of the saboteurs. No one came forward. The Norwegian people protected the Commandos with silence. Farmers left food outside their barns. Villagers looked the other way. Children were told not to speak of strangers. On March 18, 1943, Ronneberg's group crossed the Swedish border. They had skied 280 miles in 18 days. All 6 men survived. They were exhausted, frostbitten, and half-starved, but alive. Swedish border guards found them and took them to the Norwegian embassy in Stockholm. They were debriefed, given medical treatment, and flown to Britain 2 weeks later. The 3 men who remained in Norway continued sabotage operations for the next 2 years. Knut Haukelid led the mission to sink the Ferry Hydro in February 1944, destroying the last of the German heavy water. All 3 survived the war. The raid on Vemork destroyed Germany's entire stockpile of heavy water. Production resumed in April 1943, but at a severely reduced rate. The Germans managed to produce only 200 pounds of heavy water over the next 6 months, far below the 1,200 pounds needed for a working reactor. In November 1943, the Allies launched a massive bombing raid on Vemork. Over 400 American B-17 and B-24 bombers attacked the plant, dropping 700 tons of bombs. The production facility was destroyed. 22 Norwegian workers were killed. The Germans decided to evacuate the remaining heavy water to Germany. On February 19, 1944, a railway car carrying 39 barrels of heavy water, the last of the Norwegian stockpile, was loaded onto the ferry Hydro for transport across Lake Tinn. Knut Haukelid, one of the 3 commandos who had remained in Norway, led a team that planted explosives on the ferry. The charges were placed in the bow, below the waterline, timed to detonate when the ferry reached the deepest part of the lake. At 10:45 a.m., the ferry was in the middle of the lake, above water 1,300 feet deep. The charges detonated, the bow split open, water poured in. The ferry sank in 4 minutes. 14 people died, including Norwegian civilians and German guards. All 39 barrels went down with the ferry. The heavy water was lost forever. The Nazi atomic program never recovered. Werner Heisenberg, the lead German physicist, later wrote, "Without heavy water, we could not proceed. We were stopped." Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, wrote in his memoir, "The loss of heavy water production was the end of our nuclear project." Germany never built a working reactor. The atomic bomb was developed by the United States in 1945 using graphite instead of heavy water as a moderator. The first bomb was tested in July 1945. 2 bombs were dropped on Japan in August 1945, ending the war. Joachim Ronneberg received the Distinguished Service Order from Britain, the Military Cross, and Norway's War Cross with Sword. He was also awarded the United States Medal of Freedom. He refused to speak publicly about the raid for over 60 years. When journalists asked for interviews, he declined. When asked why, he said, "We were just soldiers doing our duty, nothing more." He lived a quiet life in Norway, working as a radio equipment salesman, then as a director of a broadcasting company. He married, had children, and rarely mentioned the war. In 2003, the British government declassified the Gunnerside files. Historians began calling the raid the most successful commando operation of World War II. In 2013, a statue of Joachim Ronneberg was unveiled in his hometown of Ålesund, Norway. The inscription reads, "He showed that courage and skill can change the course of history." Ronneberg attended the ceremony. He was 93 years old. He gave a short speech. He said, "We did what we had to do. We were fortunate. We were well trained. We had good intelligence, and we were lucky. That is all." He died on October 21st, 2018, at the age of 99. He was the last survivor of Operation Gunnerside. Of the 9 men who entered Vemork on the night of February 27, 1943, not one was killed or captured. No Norwegian civilians were harmed in the raid. The mission achieved total success with 0 casualties. In 1948, the British Special Operations Executive was officially dissolved. Its records were sealed for 50 years. In 2003, when the files were opened, the full extent of SOE operations became known. Over 13,000 men and women served in SOE during World War II. 3,200 were sent into occupied Europe. 1,800 were captured. 800 were executed. Operation Gunnerside remains the gold standard for special operations. It is studied in military academies around the world. The principles that made it successful, thorough intelligence, rigorous training, adaptability, and courage, remain relevant today. The heavy water cells destroyed at Vemork are now on display at the Norsk Industriarbeider Museum in Rjukan, Norway. Visitors can see the actual cells that held Hitler's atomic ambitions. The drainage tunnel used by the Commandos has been preserved and can be toured. The cabin where the Swallow team waited for 124 days still stands on the Hardangervidda Plateau. Each year, Norwegian Special Forces conduct a commemorative ski march across the same route the Commandos took to Sweden. The march covers 280 miles and takes 10 days. It is a reminder that courage, preparation, and determination can change the course of history. If you know of other impossible World War II stories we should cover, please leave a suggestion in the comments below.